improv in the Philippines, and this is my cat, Tigger. And this is the very first panel that we're having. Improv is Asian, but what exactly is Asian Improv? And I'm joined by three friends right now, and we'll know more about them as we go along. Say hello, please, to Tim Yeo, Wang, and Laxmi Priya. Hello, everyone. I want to get the ball rolling right away with the first question. Where are you right now? And how do you do improv where you are? Let's start with Tim.
Hi, everyone. I am Tim. I am based in Singapore at the moment. It is the same time zone as the Philippines, so I'm at a comfortable 9 p.m. at where I'm at. And how do we do improv here?
Yeah. What's the improv scene like in Singapore?
The improv scene, well, it's grown quite significantly over the pandemic because people are stuck in the country, and unlike most other countries, we are just an island, so you can't go very far, which means they look for things to do, which means they come and take improv classes, which has been great. I think it's been one hell of a ride, because back when I first came back to Singapore in 2014, there was barely a scene. I think there were like 8 of us who do improv together, and now I think easily in the hundreds. So we're
6-7 years later, so much growth in Singapore. We have Jay Wang. Hey, Jay.
Hey, everyone. I'm here calling in from Beijing. So luckily, our scene has been going live since last August. So it's been a year since we've been having live shows, sold out shows. I hosted a 50-person workshop last night. So COVID in China, it's still a thing. It's made a brief comeback, but mostly we have things under control. And Beijing Improv, we're a nonprofit organization, so all of our proceeds are donated to charity, and all of our workshops are free for the community in English and in Chinese. So really exciting times, and hoping the best for all the other countries as well. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Thanks, Jay. And Laxmi. There you go.
I'm doing the auspicious am I on or not question for our panel.
Yes, you are. You're on.
I'm joining in from Bangalore, India. Oh, I think there's a lag. Fantastic. So I perform with Improv Comedy Bangalore, and I'm not very old in improv proper. I have done playback theatre, which is a kind of improvisational form of real life stories, for longer. I have done it for a decade, but improv pop proper, it's only since 2018 that I began. As for the scene, it's very exciting because it is also a time when a lot of Indian young folks are looking for new things to do, and improv, like right there, sits as a form which espouses itself to be democratic, and anybody can do it, and is a community form. And there is improv. It of course started in the metro cities, but now it also has a presence in tier 2 cities or smaller spaces. But I think what is interesting is also that we are, however, is still in this stage where if you were to tell a non-suspecting person I'm an improviser, they'd be like, you mean stand-up? Because stand-up is also something really famous around the same time, and it garners a larger. So it's a duality. It's growing where people know where to go. It's growing, and where people do not know, it's still of course only a very privileged section of the society is able to access it. So yeah, that's how it is from my limited understanding.
So hello from all of us from Singapore, from Beijing, from Bangalore. Hello from all of us. This is the improvisation festival panel. But what exactly is Asian Improv? And I'd like to start with that. You're relatively new to improv with a capital I, Laxmi, but improvisation and improvisational theater is not new to you. Your background is actually in playback, which is also improvisational in a way. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think so much of the labeling and the competence skill building is so mapped to the shows that one does and the training that one does. Because it was always called playback theater, and improvisation was a tool within it, much like in devising or in movement theater or in even proscenium theater or even in more traditional Indian forms, of which I cannot speak very, very eloquently, but I know has been like a deep-rooted truth of like the energy of the room and the audience sort of speaks to the storyteller, and then the storyteller tells the story, right? So in that sense, yeah, I think improv is everywhere. And I think largely we are also, as a community, known as a storytelling community. We have very, very strong base in different storytelling modalities. As for me, why I think there is something about being a playbacker and sort of having to distinguish oneself when one introduces. Also, it's completely also me. I don't want to be like, I don't want, my head is like, you know, you go in and do a scene and they're like, you've done improv for 10 years and you look like this. So I'm always sort of like taking care of that very early on by saying I'm a playbacker for 10 years. However, I've done improv for 3 years. So that's also where this sort of, yeah, like you said, Gabe, I think what for me is distinguishing is that what does the poster read? What is the stage? What is the MC announcing this particular performance as? But beyond those fixed categories, everything is pretty fluid, and the sort of skills we are developing in all these forms overlap greatly. So, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Now, your background was in playback for 10 years. Jay and Tim, you learned your improv abroad. Jay in New York. What was that like? Am I correct?
It's recording in progress.
It's funny because I actually started improv in Beijing.
In Beijing. Okay.
Yeah, I got in touch with the Wednesday night workshops that we do here about 10 years ago now, just through my real estate agent. I was looking for apartments. I found the improv scene instead. And it was only later, maybe a couple of years later, that I went back to New York and I discovered, like UCB has schools here, pretty famous improv school in New York. And that's when I did the intensive in New York. So I kind of did it backwards a little bit. And I think I'm so blessed that I found the scene in Beijing first, because I think if I started in New York, I wouldn't have stuck with it. You know, it's a very competitive scene. It didn't feel as welcoming and as inclusive as the scene that we have here in Beijing. So I'm actually really grateful and really blessed that I started my improv journey here. So that's my answer.
and that's a thing that some people do say about Asian improv, that it is generally a more inclusive scene, not as competitive, not so much involved in one-upmanship and all of that.
Exactly, because it feels like everyone is starting kind of from the same place. You know, we're all new to this. We're all co-creating this community together. Whereas in America, it's like, we are established and we know what improv is, and this is how you do improv. So that's what it kind of felt like.
And these are the teachers, and these are the schools.
And you must do a Herald, otherwise you are no improviser. That was the gist of it.
Tim, you came across improv when you were studying abroad. Am I correct?
Yep. I fell into improv by chance, actually, because I was studying in the UK, and then about 10 years ago, I went back for my winter break, and my mom was like, "Have you made any British friends?" And I was like, "No." And she was like, "Can you please go and make some British friends if you're there, like immerse yourself in the culture?" And I was like, what would get me there fastest? And I had signed up for the Improv Society during the Freshers Week. So a flyer had like a mailer happened to come into my email. I was like, oh, this looks like fun. So I signed up. I decided to attend the workshop, and that's how I got started. So I started with the University Society, the Bristol Improv Society, where my contemporaries have since set up the Bristol Improv Theatre. So yeah.
And I follow them. Jay, I'm gonna go back to you because you perform with in Beijing right now, and you
Yes.
mentioned earlier before the show that you're the only Asian performing with that group right now, and you have the
Yeah.
experience of taking improv. Excuse my cat. Of taking improv in the U.S. Is there any difference the way the Asian improv student behaves in improv classes that you might have noticed, or are students the same everywhere?
I can only speak for China and the US. And I think in China, I feel like there's a lot more, I think, focus on, it feels like people are using improv as a form of therapy, like working out their family issues, their relationship issues. In America, it felt like it was a lot more slapstick. There was a lot of different crazy ideas going on. In China, it feels like, we're really getting into like, how my mom treated me as a teenager, and like I'm getting it out on stage, and you see a lot of that. And I kind of encourage that, because for me, improv was that as well. When I first started, it was an opportunity to put a lot of myself out on stage. So I really enjoy that with my students here.
We call that in Filipino hugot, which is a Tagalog word, but that means to dig deep, to pull something from deep inside and lay it all out on the stage or in conversation. Does that happen, Tim, Lakshmi, with your students in improv class?
Well, I think for me, for me, I actually find trouble getting my students to hugot, if I'm correctly.
You said it correctly.
There are times where I stop my class and I go, okay, I know we are very Asian here and we are all refusing to speak about our feelings and emotions, but when we are doing improv, there is a need to be vulnerable. So, stop suppressing or repressing or oppressing whatever you're feeling and let it out. And then when it finally clicks for them, because not everyone does it immediately, but when it does, you see magic happen. You really do see magic happen.
Lakshmi.
Yeah, I think my answer is very in the zone of in playback, because I teach a lot more playback theater and train my team in playback theater more. It is almost imperative that we have to speak from our experiences, because when we're rehearsing, it is our stories that we are playing back to each other, before we can meet the audience and tell their stories. So definitely there is a creation of like bonds based on on witnessing each other, which is, I think, very, very big in all the spaces. And also for me, this is interesting. The question is interesting because I have only done, before the pandemic hit, I had done only Asian improv, because I've never done improv in India. So everybody, so much so that I never thought of it as Asian improv, which is why for me, the category of Asian is sort of constructed against the non-Asian, which I only confronted in March 2020 when the pandemic hit. And then suddenly there is a need to say I'm Asian improviser as opposed to the normative improviser who's obviously not Asian, who's white, who's American, who's gone to Second City or whatever. So I was just like a bit like, oh, okay, now I'll need to find the adjectives that suit me as an improviser, which I never had to think, because the only people I had performed with were my teammates, who were all Indians, thereby Asians. But now that I've performed a little bit more and taught a little bit more in the places that I've taught in, which have very strong code of conduct and which have very strong policies to have teachers who are outside, of their maybe immediate circles. I think I have encountered a lot of curiosity. Also because of the nature of online improv, there's a lot like, okay, so what do you guys do different? Or I want to learn. So I think I've also been lucky in that sense. There's a lot of but the curiosity comes from the same place that the Asian, non-Asian comes from. I'm not saying it's toxic or bad, but I'm saying it exists. That divide sort of exists. And yeah, it's interesting how it plays out.
Absolutely, I would echo that, and I'm glad you used the word normative because the normative history of improv, it's always traced back to the work of Viola Spolin or Keith Johnstone, etc., North America, Chicago, etc., and Hull House in the 1930s. And then Western improv also teaches that its origins are in Commedia dell'arte, which was an Italian Renaissance theater form. So it's very Western. That's the normative definition of improvisation. I'd like to ask the question, and we tackled it a little bit, Lakshmi, earlier. For example, in Chinese culture, are there improvisational theater forms as well, perhaps, that we could take a look at? Tim, Jay, would you know of any improvisational traditional theater in the Philippines? While you're thinking about that, or there you go.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just clearing my throat. But I do believe that in medieval China, poetry was recited in the courts, improvised. They gave a topic and then they would improvise around that topic. Poetry. So I think that is one. Jay, I don't know if you've heard of it, but I think certain elements of xiangshen is also improvised, is it?
Yeah. I think there is improvised and kind of prepared xiangshen, which is crosstalk. It's two people talking back and forth. It's kind of like stand up with a little bit of improv thrown in there. Yeah.
We have a similar form called balagtasan, which is in Tagalog, and it's improvised poetry and call and response and argument. I guess it's like those rap battles right now, rap battles right now, but older. The beginning poem would be scripted, but where the joy would be in the back and forth and the arguments, and those would be improvised. And there was also a tradition of chanting heroic epics here, the Kambayoka, all of that throughout, where certain parts where you stick to the storyline but make up things sort of in between. So I think one of the things that I'd really like to put forward is improvisation is not an exclusively Western thing. There are long traditions of it across different cultures. Yes, Italy, but also China, also India, also the Philippines, that go back centuries as well.
If I can just add a very Singaporean response to what you just said.
Yes.
The reason why they would ground it that way is because capitalism, isn't it? That's when you control the narrative, you sell your story, and when you sell your story, people buy into it. But that doesn't mean that your story is the only story out there.
Absolutely. And I felt a lot of guilt when you were saying that, because I used to introduce myself as, I learned my improv from Paul Sills, the son of Viola Spolin. And I took improv under Keith Johnstone and also Charna Halpern. And, I'm like, wow, wait a minute, those are all Western names. And I just took short workshops with them.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, and I want to bring it back to the question you just asked about, these traditions. And I think, at least in Chinese culture, traditionally, education was very much, a rich person's pursuit. And, you memorized tomes and Confucian texts, and it was all about reciting past classics, and the lowbrow stuff was improvised, right? The street theaters and stuff that you saw in the, in the crowds. And so I think improv in America also started from that like blue collar working class background, as opposed to theater, which was very highbrow, right? Improv started off as this lowbrow thing. And I think that's, to me, what's beautiful, right? It's in touch with people's everyday lives. You're not acting about, something happened 200 years ago. You're in here right now with everyone. You're in the present. And I think, that to me is the beauty of improv. And I think that, transcends boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, Lakshmi.
Yeah, I think as you folks were talking about this performative tradition of sort of debate, I was remembering the little classes of Buddhist philosophy that I have taken. So in Buddhism, there's a long tradition of like performative debating. Also, sort of like, I mean, not the only, but like a lot. I was also thinking that it would be useful because anyways, we're talking about this for me to place myself, like just locate myself in this large country called India, which is like I'm quite my list of privileges are longer than not. Like I'm college
Yeah.
educated is itself quite a portion of people, and I'm upper caste, which means I come with a lot of like caste privilege, and I can speak English quite articulate.
Right.
And I studied in a university which taught English studies. So all of these are, and I think as I met people who are doing improv in India, there are many homogeneities. As different as we are, I think some of our privileges look the same because of how it is framed as a Western pursuit. Because the ones who are watching the sitcoms are the ones who are listening to, because
Right.
a certain, when you're colonized, and when you are told for many, many years that the aspirational is what you're looking at, then your consciousness of the popular culture and the nice and the virtuous is not what you have, but what you have. And it sort of, for me, shows up in the fact that all these traditional forms, which I know had improvisation, I know none of them. I don't practice any of them because like the sort of family that I was born into and I grew up into, the education that I have, all have semblances of like casteism, systematic, the colonial education, everything. So then when I look at improv, obviously I'm already inherently thinking it is good because it's Western, right? Like
Yeah.
not that traditional forms are not good, but that's how it's been given also to me. And it takes so much work to like break that, but then you still know that you learned it the way it was framed for you. So there's no real absolute breaking away from. So that's where I am at. I have given up trying to like find Indian improv or Laxmi improv devoid of the learnings from the teachers who are not Indian that I learned from, but also to now acknowledge this is what I have and how can I make this mine and see the gaps as much as I can.
I'd like to actually, from my experience with playback, and I really like the conversation, juxtaposing playback and improvisation. Somehow, your list of privileges growing up where we are, where we were also a colony, somehow helps in improvisation, but in playback, privilege is something that shouldn't be there. Am I right? Or you're more conscious of getting rid of?
Yeah, one needs to be, I mean, if you want to do meaningful and rewarding playback, one needs to be aware of one's biases. And one of the first biases one meets is one's privileges and what one thinks of what one is not, right? Like, oh, so your mother pointed to somebody and said they are such and such, and you thought there was truth. Right? Oh, they are such and such. But then in playback, when you play such a character, you realize this is not truth. This is my bias about such a character. And then you go into a messy spiral and then learn some humility. But yeah, I think
there's a shift, right?
It's definitely a shift for me because in playback you're playing somebody else's story, and in even the most basic playback classes, the first thing you're taught is that the teller's story is sacrosanct. That's important. You need to respect. But in improv, the skills that I've learned after having done playback is to be able to find my own narrative, and here narrative is sort of given. So there are different things I'm sort of learning from each other, and there are gaps that are being filled crisscross.
Thank you, Lakshmi. So we're all in an interesting space right now where improv is newish in our cultures. We don't bear the burden of improv that started in the 50s and all of that. How does our background, our culture, where we live, how we live, our age, our shape. How does that challenge our understanding of improv? Is there a I think another way of saying that, is there a Beijing kind of improv, a Singapore kind of improv, a Bangalore kind of improv, a Manila sort of improv? And how does the culture and how we live shape it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gabe. And I was kind of reflecting on this, and I think now in Asia, right? I would say Manila and Singapore are kind of the hotbeds of improv, and I was like, why is that? And I think maybe that is also due to some form of the colonial history that's been left, right? The fact that people speak English there. You can have international troops come in and perform all in English, and we can all understand it, right? It's something that we can't really do in Beijing as much, besides other issues. And I can really relate to also what you guys were talking about in terms of this, kind of putting the Western on a pedestal, right? I think when I started my improv journey, I definitely was guilty of that as well. And I think unlearning a lot of that and exploring kind of the roots of what improv is to me, rather than where it comes from in a book or taught by a prestigious school. I think that's something that we're really trying to explore more now here in Beijing.
Thank you, Jay.
Yeah.
Tim, what defines Singaporean improv? What are the common factors you think?
I think it's quite difficult for us to put a pin on what defines Singaporean improv. For the very fact that because Singapore is a hotbed of different cultures and different, I don't like to use the word, but different races, the different ethnicities tend to mesh together, and on top of that, you add on an international element where you have so many people from all over the world coming in. Like in my class, I can't say my usual class would be like 80 or 90% Singaporean. I would say that it's really a good mix of local and foreigners that come to classes. So even with performing teams, the teams that you see out there, they tend to be a hodgepodge of different nationalities, different ethnicities. One thing that I think unites the Singapore improv community is that it tends to lean towards an upper middle class.
Right.
It becomes a class situation, right? And so I think if you're asking me what is Singaporean improv, maybe to a certain extent, upper middle class people who are coming together to try and build a community and hopefully outreach to the bigger society in Singapore. Yeah.
I'm so glad you have the candor to put that out, that it's upper middle class. I know Laxmi raised her hand, and I'll go to you. But for the school we put up is Third World Improv, and for all the downtrodden image that Third World might have, our student base is more or less young, upper middle class, university educated as well. And we have made efforts in the past through scholarship programs, performances in public markets, but we haven't made a great big headway either in those who are not from the upper middle class sector as well. Laxmi, you were raising your hand earlier.
Oh, that was just me resonating that this is a very important and resonant conversation for me, because I think we talk as much as we can about the composition, demographic composition of who's in the room, in our rooms, audience, in our as a team who we are, and definitely people. The simple truth is people who don't have to depend on this for livelihood, especially just performance of improv. Like there's just no money like that. And I don't personally know anybody who makes all their livelihood from doing improv or even teaching improv, I would say, unless I'm of course probably wrong. So then that directly is like, this is a thing you have to do on top of either, you're doing other forms of performances, or you have a day job, or you are a teacher, or you run a school in India at least. Even then, it's never sort of
Never
matches
enough.
that. Yeah, it's never enough. It's never enough. But also on top of that, it's not necessarily recognized because it's new, right? So there's always all of that. And then if you are depending on teaching, then you want to be able to teach people who can pay you for it, so that you can then do these shows which are financially zero. Like, it doesn't get you any money, So then we get into, from us, like I get into a cycle that to think about bringing people who are absent from these spaces because they can't access it is a whole different, not just a conversation, a whole different structuring of one's company and of one's teaching. And that is also like not to be tokenistic, but one has to change how one teaches altogether. And
yeah, that dovetails nicely with the question from our friend Kim Tan. And when we talk about people making a living out of improv, that's usually a US thing.
It's a scam in improv in Asia.
Yeah, but some of them move on in the US to SNL, and that's why they go to Second City or IO. And Kim's question is, if later improv becomes a viable path towards a career, for example, the improv SNL pathway in the US, will the inclusiveness that's present in Asian improv suffer from increased internal competitiveness?
And I can actually
go Jay.
address that from a Beijing perspective, because that's actually exactly what we saw a few years ago. And funny thing is, they were trying to develop a Chinese version of SNL, I think around 2018. And what you saw was the commercialization of improv. You had a lot of entertainment companies come into our community, which used to be a vibrant community, Chinese improvisers, Western improvisers, all playing together, doing, shows for very cheap and free workshops. And suddenly, they were being signed away by these large entertainment companies and not allowed to even talk to other groups and teams, and it just became these silos of people working on projects on tight deadlines, very stressful in order to generate content. And so we definitely got that. Luckily, they found that there wasn't that much good content maybe to be generated at the time that was suitable for their needs. So I think those companies ran out of money, and eventually the scene kind of came back to a healthy normality. So all's well that ends well.
Our story, I think, is a little bit similar. There was a rumor going around in Manila 5+ years ago that somebody wanted to bring in a version of SNL or Second City. They were just thinking about it. And we were like, wait, hold on. We've been doing this for a decade, and somebody will eat the lunch that we've prepared for 15 years. So that's why we put up Third World Improv. And really, the play on the word is really, you had Second City West, we have Third World over in Asia. And that was a little bit deliberate.
I love it.
Ria adds to Kim. She asks, happy birthday, Ria, by the way. Does putting a commercial structure or a commercial end to improv derail its communitarian benefits?
Yes. I think that old adage, money is the root of all evil. I think it's like a chicken and egg situation, right? Because without money, can we sustain the community? But then if the community starts wanting the money, then what will happen to the community? So it becomes like a 6-cycle carousel. I do feel that, just to add on to what Jay has said earlier as well, it becomes very apparent when you bring in the talk of money and the potential, because that changes the collaborativeness of it. It's no longer necessarily a rising tide raises all ships. It could be a tsunami that sinks some, while others tend to benefit from that wave. And so I feel the commercial structure is a very fine balance. And I think what the improv company in Singapore is doing has been great in that they've managed to balance it very well for the longest of time, although I do believe Kim would, and this is for Kim to to mention on his own, but I do believe he would love to have a bit more than what the improv company is getting at the moment. But yeah, I definitely think that having a commercial structure to or even turning it into like a gateway to stardom, that's what really takes away that collaborativeness and the communitarian benefits. Yeah,
absolutely. And as the biggest shareholder of Third World Improv on paper, I can also proudly say that I'm the lowest paid faculty, and even from corporate shows. A commercial, to echo, commercial structure is necessary for sustainability. But if it's your objective, then that can really, really affect the community. Mike Obamos has a question. Why does improv seem to cater to the upper middle class? Is it because of the so-called benefit of the language of our colonizers? If so, how can we find the balance between native local language and colonial language? I love how big these questions are. And we're tackling more of these in the next few panels, but let's take a stab at it.
Yeah, I think the answer is in the question itself. I think the benefit of the language of our colonizers, especially depending on who our teachers, and I'll speak for Bangalore, when there is a particular image of how a scene looks, or even in genre, right? Like even now, I'm doing if there's a workshop on movies, which is local, but the structure is what we have been taught, which could be Western. It on the surface, which is why to me, having cultural references only at the level of adding language or couple of words is a bit, it's good, it's great, but to me it's not sufficient, because we are not looking at like what scaffolds it stands on. And to me that can happen differently. And I'm a big believer that if an Asian body is doing improv, it's Asian improv, because we are doing it from our experience, our nostalgia, our longings, our desires, and our passions, what we have and what we don't. So I would think, I don't have an answer, but my gut says that it is along the lines of being unapologetic. Like a lot of my answers is in the zone, I feel, of irreverence and not being apologetic, of trying out things. Because especially when you speak English the way most of us in this panel speak, we also want to do an improv in the way people who speak this language do. But what would it mean to take me like 4 or 5 steps back and say, not just in a genre form, but in the very essence of yes-anding? Does the way of yes-anding in our homes look different from yes-anding? For example, like in dinner table, when we are serving food, like sometimes my mother serves before I even realize that I want that food. And it is a big part of like my home's culture. And I know some Indian families which have, and that is yes-anding in a way that I don't even have to initiate, like she initiates that offer in a way. And to me, that's a different ethos of yes-anding or acknowledging and building. So are there those sort of structural realities which are staring at us, but maybe I haven't yet brought in? So for me, it's like an ethos deeper work of ethos, but also, of course, meanwhile, like adding more languages, doing more stories and characters which look and sound like us and have had our experiences.
There's so many thoughts raced through my head while you were speaking, because there are just so many more layers. Like, for example, our different ethnicities. How I know that in the few times that I've improvised in North America, they're very careful. They're very particular and don't mention ethnicities, religion, sexuality, etc. How is that maneuvered? Where you are. For us, we embrace the challenge, and I have a little bit of the advantage of my improv team is a little bit old. Well, it's a lot older than most, but and we seem to tackle these questions between ourselves as well, being of different sexualities and genders as well. But is there a difference in the way Asian groups, or your groups in particular, let's not generalize, when they navigate ethnicity, religion, gender roles, all of that? How is that done?
For us, everything is on the table, as long as we don't talk about politics, because then we lose our
camera. You've got. I will say it. I will say it, Jay. When you perform with Beijing Improv, their theater has a camera, and the nearest police station actually has a feed to watch it.
Right. And they're like, I don't know what they're saying, but if they make fun of Xi Jinping, we're taking them out. No, but our shows can get quite raunchy. You know, we do a lot of different takes on language and culture and race. And, you know, a part of me actually enjoys that, not being in America, because I know things are very, polarized and
and can be volatile there.
Yeah, I think political correctness is a big thing in North America right now. But I think in Beijing, we have relative freedom to talk about a lot of these things, as long as we veer off the red line.
Which is politics. Yes, Tim.
So I think for Singapore, it's slightly more sensitive in that, because we don't have a homogeneous society,
right?
And so, like, say my team ASAP, for example, we are all Singaporean Chinese, and for us, I think generally what we do is we try and tell stories that can apply across different ethnicities that within Singapore, but for particular pain points of other ethnicities that we may not we definitely will not understand, or we may not grasp delicately, we try to avoid, because we don't want to end up being disrespectful towards them on that. And what I think ASAP's brand is that we try and tackle a very local Chinese Singaporean mindset that that is factually the majority of Singapore, but isn't the be all and end all of Singapore. Yeah.
Do you find yourselves falling into ethnic stereotypes when you do some of these roles? And to give an example, sometimes a Filipino improviser in a panic might suddenly assume the role of a maid or a driver, because we do have a domestic workforce which goes to different countries. Do you find that happening in your groups?
Yeah, a lot. I think there is definitely I think first I also what we said about the politics and so-called volatile topics of things.
Right.
From some of my friends in the US, I'm hoping there is already like some change, because, this understanding of like what is not addressed can never be resolved, right? Like if you don't address it, because if there is racism in shows, not talking about it is not what is going to take it away, unless everybody is in therapy and everybody is doing their work in silos, which is unlikely. Even then it will come up on stage. Talking about it is what's going to lead to some sort of at least first step to awareness. But that's one thing I wanted to say. I think with the Black Lives Matter and with Black Improv Alliance and a lot of other teachers who are more sensitive, hopefully it's changing a little more, because it's, that's where for me, that's where the important stuff is. In the differences, in the layers, in learning how to not be stereotypical while dealing with it. That's how we should be. I want to live my life in some ways, but also to answer the stereotypes that come up in shows. I think especially like you said in Panic, but also sometimes because of what we spoke about, who usually ends up doing improv, that has a direct connection to what are the stereotypes that come up, and that's not innocent. If mostly in India, upper caste, upper class, upper middle class, college educated folks end up doing improv, then the stereotypes are going to be about the people who are not present in the room. And that's also because we have learned that from so long. So the gaps and the stereotypes and on whom the jokes are made are usually also either people who are easier to target because they are minorities, or because they are somebody you have had no experience dealing with. You have never seen a real person. Lastly, the team that I auditioned and started improv with is the Adamant Eves, which is all women, at least then all women.
Lovely names. Lovely names.
Yeah, thank you. I was the second layer of Improv. It was the original folks who came up with a name, fantastic name. And I think part of it, when we started, we knew that people are going to be like, oh, you guys are men hating, and another feminist group, or whatever the thing sort of comes with it. So at least before pandemic, we had decided to embrace that. We were like, yeah, okay, you come and find out. You think that? Come and find out how it's going to be. But definitely a lot of our identity comes from the fact that we are not taking that off the table, but we are in fact serving all of it on the table very respectfully and very, as much as we can, sensitively.
Yeah, if I can share my experience, when I first started doing improv, I found myself leaning on a lot of stereotypes about my own race. I would do a lot of Chinese accents and other Asian accents. And I remember after one show, like a white American friend came up to me and he was like, that was kind of racist. And I was like, what, you're lecturing me on racism right now? And then when I went back and thought about it, I was like, it kind of was in a way, even though it was my own race, right? I felt like I wasn't representing a character. I was representing, the distortion of this character as a stereotype. And, I think, we're still guilty of that at times on stage, for sure, myself included. But I think, the goal is to play more nuanced characters. They can have an accent, they can have, peculiarities, but it's about playing a more substantive character than just, hey, I'm Russian and I drink vodka. Like, that's not interesting.
Right.
So that's my 2 cents.
I think we have been guilty of that at one point or another, of making fun of our own race to get a cheap laugh or a panic laugh at first. Here's a fun question.
It's low-hanging fruit, right? It's gonna get a laugh.
Here's a fun question from Kim Tan. An improviser in Singapore, born and raised in Europe, who learned and honed their improv for the last 5 to 6 years. Do they represent Asian improv in any way? That's the question.
No, not in my opinion.
Huh. Okay, why not?
I think Laxmi raised a point earlier on an Asian body doing improv is Asian improv. Of course, I think if we go back to semantics of the question in the first place, right? Asian is one of the, it is sorry, not one of the, it is the biggest.
It's the biggest.
In the world. And there's so many different ethnicities. How we look from each other are completely different. And you know, to quote Lee Kuan Yew's Asian values, I always ask them, which part of Asia are you talking about? Which part of Asian values are you referring to? However, I think there is that identification that if you are ethnically Asian, in terms of geopolitical ethnicity, then that story that you tell, whether as a third culture kid or as someone who is directly from Asia, is Asian improv. So I would agree with Laxmi on her stance that Asian body doing improv is Asian improv.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Tim said, I also want to again position myself that I'm coming from a country which is becoming progressively ethno-fascist, India. I'm very wary of like sort of.
I love how you put it. Progressively ethno-fascist. I love how you
we
casually,
always were, but now there's
put
no,
it
like,
out there.
Yeah, now there's no like borders about it. We're like proud of that. Like we're like majority. Like what up? It's horrible. It's horrible. So I do want to position myself as that I am very much personally don't hold like culture as the be all end all of it. Like I wouldn't say like only Asians can be Asian improviser. However, I think it's a good question to ask. Why is there a need in historically there has been some power dynamics for say somebody who's born and brought up in Europe? Why can't they be a very conscious and sensitive European improviser doing improv in Asia? Is there something that is at loss if that's their identity as opposed to Asian improviser? Because also as Tim said and as Jay said, and as this panel has sort of, not just this panel, this festival is showing that there is no one kind of Asian improv anyway. There is no one kind of Indian improv anyway. There's no one kind of Bangalore improv anyway. So what is it that is, if this is an award, that Asian improviser, why does somebody, I think I would love for this hypothetical improviser to ask themselves in front of the mirror, why do I want that award? Like, why do I want that label? Like, why do I want the label of Asian improv?
Actually, just to quickly add on to that, I think it does boil down to identity politics as well, right? Of whether I identify as Asian, and having given it a little bit more thought. What about, say, someone who was adopted from the West into an Asian family based in Asia? Would that become Asian improv? I think that's something that.
Or even the other way around, from the refugees. Exactly. And then okay, we've covered so much, and believe it or not, that's already been an hour for us. And here's the funny thing. This is just the first of the 4 panels here at the ImprovisAsian Festival. The next panel will be improvising with your colonizers. How do we destroy colonial mentality? The third panel is political correctness. What is the line between celebration and appropriation? And the final panel is how can we continue to celebrate as a global community? And I think we touched on all of those topics today. A great way to kick off the panels for this. My stage manager is already killing me in the PMs and time is up. So thank you so much, Tim. When can they watch you in this festival?
You can see me perform with ASAP at 6:30 on Sunday, and then again with the Improv Company block at, I think, 8:30. That's the correct timing that we go on. And you can follow me on social media at Saving Timmy.
Jay?
We dropped the ball on registering for time slots. Unfortunately, this is our only appearance, but you can follow us on Facebook at Beijing Improv.
And see you live, actually.
Yes, and see us live in Beijing. Exactly.
Laxmi?
Hi, tomorrow in one of the slots, of which time I do not know. ICB, which has a 2-hour slot. One of the shows that I and Siddhartha co-directing called Gather Round is playing and also in the block 2. We are doing a short form playback demo show, which I would love to invite you to. And on 28th Saturday, I'm a part of a panel conversation duo show calling De-Shaffing the Wheat. So I'm going to be around quite a bit. And I also have a workshop. Wow. Okay. I'm there every day. So
you're everywhere.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Laxmi, Jay, and Tim. This is the first panel of our improvisation panels. Thank you so much. We put together this festival to celebrate Asian improvisation, to have uncomfortable conversations, but worthwhile conversations. Thank you so much, dear friends, for participating. We're going to move on to the next blocks and the next workshops. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Gabe. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.